Once upon a time, there was a field. And in this field, there was a valley. And in the valley, there was a garden. And in the garden, there was a war. The plants turned on each other. There was a time of terrible trouble and tormentation. It went on from generation to generation, and the world watched helplessly in horror as the war was waged. The bracken and the gorse were the main source of the irreversible rage that roused or ratted or rabble in this unfortunate scratch of earth. And it went on and on and on in a spiral for far too long for either one to be able to win anything that could ease the hurt and the pain that they inflicted on each other. And it looked like it would go on like that forever. And all the other shrubbery had to learn to live with it, to avoid dying by it, fit in or fight it out. Until a council of peace was formed over in the neighbouring fields, chaired by the ash, the oak and the alder, mediated by the wren, the robin and the rook, and the efforts to create negotiations was undertook. Word was, the wren and the robin had been covertly carrying messages in between the bracken and the gorse all winter long, unbeknownst to anyone, in the hope that some kind of discourse would lead to a ceasefire of sorts, which could then make a bit of room for discussions to take root on how to go about ending this unholy war. And all military ranks from all plants were stood down, and there they stood, head to head, hood to hood, stick to stick, stalk to stalk, and no one dared blink and no one dared talk. Hardened veteran soldiers, stoically awaiting to carry out their orders. Kill, or be killed trying. Even the wind held her breath as the mists of perspiration arose from the valley floor. The tension from these talks was nearly unbearable. The possibilities of peace were nearly too painful to hope for. And the whole field was focused on this for now. Looked like the last throw of the dice. And waves of whisperings were heard from the tops of the trees. The bracken threw a truly defiant shape out there in the open. Thin, gaunt, shattered souls with long, crooked shadows standing down as erect as their brittle limbs would allow, half hung and haunted looking, clinging to the corpse of their cause. But the blunt, brutal truth that war can never bear fruit isn't lost on them either. Even as they fall to their deaths, upright, as they often have done, just to teach their young how to die in absolute defiance. That said, they did eventually advance to the rear and lay their arms down for the peace talks to continue this year. And the gorse looks every bit as terrifying and uncompromising as he intends to look. He stands strong, stout and proud, an unbroken presence in a fortress of thorns. Even the wind tries to blow around him when she exhales. But the bite of last winter's bitter northern gales had burnt back a bushel of his younger shrubs, and now he just didn't feel that good. Not even after last summer's excursions when the fiery haze of the battle rage was on him. He too let a few of the long grasses grow in between them to soften some of the blows in between them. The snowdrop set the scene early one morning in late January, appearing so still on the hill, up out there in the frozen cold, standing vigil over the latest corpse in this pitiful, protracted war, their heads bowed in solemn prayer. And from the tips of their petals fell tears, forming a pool at their feet that cut through the frost and ran like a river straight down the valley floor. And now nothing could ever be as it was before. They'd made a point of being seen, standing up out there in absolute silence as if in a dream, while the hail and sleet turned to rain, making a river off a stream that rushed on ahead to wake up the weary down the war-torn valley in the war-torn field. And a parish of purple archangels growing in and out of the foot of the old gatepost wall began their day, as they do, with a prayer, a very particular prayer, a binding prayer, a prayer that can combine everyone's prayers. And the primroses responded with light blossoms, still slightly afraid to stand out too much, but the bluebells were the first to fully feel what it was to answer this call, as they arose up together one and all, imploring the bracken not to go back to war. The blackthorn opened white, bright blossoms on a young sapling above the fortress of thorns as a sign of salutation. The sun was rising to shine, when suddenly everything went silent. There was a pause in the talks. The shadow of the hill fell back on the field, and the cold returned, carried by the teeth of the wind, like a reminder of those last bits of frost still hidden in behind the stones, like doubt in their shadows, unhealed wounds, unburied lies, unresolved vendettas and dark insinuated threats. And the gorse blamed the bracken, and the bracken blamed the gorse, of course, and back and forth, and back and forth. And the plants were making plans for a return to war. The rooks were called in from the neighbouring fields, and they spread out and fanned about, taking time to listen to all the warring parties' hedgemasters' concerns, of which there were many. And until enough promises of peace are pronounced, armaments buried, prisoners released, it was back to killing and war, as they were before. But eventually those rooks formed a parliament in the garden, brought back the basis of a negotiation at a negotiating table. There was nowhere else to go. This was the only show. And sometimes the current of focused commotion can create the flow of forward motion, and so it flowed and so it flows. But negotiating peace between warring wildflowers isn't and never has been easy. Some plant types are better suited to a life of strife. The thistle, the nettle, or the briar, for example, they don't seem too keen on this push for peace. Their separate strongholds have been hard fought for, and they're bound by solemn oaths to defend them. Any peace agreement will have to include their unassailable right to bear stings, bristles and thorns. And the thistle intends to carry on regardless, agitating his way through the outcrops. As long as he has prickles, he'll keep on being a thistle, and he'll hustle and hassle and bustle and battle each and every one who dares to grow around him. And the nettle will have questions to answer if the peace talks are to hold, like his behaviour in around the rushes and how his being there was all for their own protection. It just mightn't wash anymore. He's been trading in pain for far too long, and everyone's just too sore. And the briar, or the bramble as she likes to be addressed on occasion, bristles with seething malcontent and irritation at every word uttered by the ash, the oak and the alder. Easy to pontificate about the benefits of peace when you're 50 feet above the rest of us mere survivors down here in this God-for-Jesus-in valley. You mind your peace, pal, and I'll mind mine. And some of the more extreme elements of the dandelion are spitting fury too. Peace was not what they were fighting for. Peace was never their designated destination. They claimed that this is their domain, and they and only they have the God-given right to barge about the field in the month of March, declaring dominion over both sides of the valley and give the garden a good going over. And as ever, the existential threat of a right load of bucalons getting overly interested in this area doesn't make any of this any easier either. I can only say what I see. And the secret settlements that'll have to be made to bind this cessation of hostilities are just that, secret. Only the funguses well below the undergrowth truly know who's to be whose, what gives and where to go. And the worms will never tell what they've been told not to tell. But the word got out from the silent talks that the war was to be called off and that peace was to be declared in the garden. And so, peace was declared in the garden. Immediately a flush of daisies appeared. The hills began to blush a little. The sun climbed higher in the sky, the rooks flew back to the neighbouring fields, and absolute pandemonium ensued. No one really knew what to do. Would you believe it? Was it actually true? Dandelions appeared to hover around, daring to dander about in the demilitarised zones, a few at first, then by the dozen. The hawthorn burst into flower and covered all around her in white, pink, soft, bright blossoms. And the bluebells beamed deep, silent sighs of relief, undulating like a murmuration of starlings. This was what they were waiting for. This was what they were praying so long for. And buttercups began popping their heads up here and there unannounced. Even the plantains with their soldiery airs started to sway a bit. The higher they got, the more they forgot to be standing straight and looking so serious. And the rushes rejoiced righteously and drank deeper with every sup, savouring each and every wave of relief that washed over them. And irises appeared at the other end of the field, indicating some activity from a deeper water source. And the garlic resurfaced in around the back of the bracken like a brass band honking their horns. They knew that this coming summer would go down in history. This was it. This was the shit. This is the moment when winter turns to spring, spring turns to summer, war becomes peace, peace becomes normal, night turns to day, frost turns to river, death turns to life, and time turns to rhythm. And that just goes to show that the divine drive to grow that's in every living thing can only be held back for so long, no matter how urgent or important your war is. And the long and short grasses have stayed up every night for days on end, putting their arms around everyone, over the moon and under the sun, each moment the happiest moment of their lives. And most of the dandelions truly believe now and whip off their tops in ecstasy and get completely out of their heads all over the place, as dandelions do. And the purple archangels have stayed and prayed, and they intend to stay and pray until the prayer is done. And there's plenty to pray for. No one won. Now, all the plants in the garden will have to learn to live alongside each other now, without recourse to force, or the threat of it. It won't be easy, but it will be peace. And it's holding and unfolding as we speak. And yes, there's issues to resolve in the undergrowth. It says the briar has the ivy in around the foot of the blackthorn tree with one of her sharpest thorns to her throat. And the ivy says she wasn't in receipt of any backhanders or kickbacks from the dark arts back in the day. But theirs is an old quarrel from a time long before the beginning and ending of this worn out war. And the word is out now in amongst the wildflowers in the neighbouring fields that the war is over for good and the valley is open for growing in. Rich soil, high in nutrients, reasonable drainage, east-west facing, long suffering patient neighbours, sheltered but not too shady. And of course the mosses absorb it all, but not with their usual smug self-assurance. They have lost a lot of foothold in this field, such has been the unrelenting upsurge in young, vigorous growth, bursting at the seams since peace broke out in the garden of the valley in the field.